Hello. This is going to be the 64th installment of what I've come to think of as Franco Twinkie Speaks His Mind. My weekly call-in to Marty McSorley's program on WFMU, where he allows me to talk about anything I want to. And mostly that's stories from my misspent youth. In the fall of 1970, I saw the Grateful Dead on television. It was a live broadcast that had been taped at the Family Dog in San Francisco earlier that year. I don't think it's wrong to say that I was intrigued. That Christmas, my mom gave me American Beauty, and in quick succession I acquired Working Man's Dead and Oxomoxoa. So by the time they blew into town that following summer, I was ready to go. And that's going to be the topic of my little fireside chat tonight. So why don't I just call Marty? You'd think I'd have this dialed in by now, but I don't, because I basically don't like to do anything that requires me to think out of my box, which is living in the real world. Okay, there we go. Marty, it's Franco. Full disclosure, I'm going to talk about the dead. So for anyone who might find that disturbing, I suggest you go get a beer or a pretzel, or just go outside and stare into the far distance for a while. Exactly 50 years ago yesterday, on Friday, August 6, 1971, my older sister took me and a friend to see the Grateful Dead at the Hollywood Palladium. It was a roasting hot day in LA, and Sunset Boulevard was clogged up with a lot of half-dressed hippies. The tickets were $5, which was the standard price of a concert at that time. I had just turned 16, and it was the first concert I attended that had an open dance floor. It must have been sold out because it quickly became packed to the walls. Once the music started and the joints were lit, the temperature in that place shot up about 50 degrees. After the New Riders finished their set, everyone just stood around smoking weed until the Dead came out. At that time, the Grateful Dead were the original 5 members, the Warlocks, a bar band from Palo Alto. Very soon, that would change forever, and with it, the perception of who they were. The Dead played exceptionally well that night. People who saw them countless times have said that show was one for the books. And who am I to argue? It must have been the heat, because man, it was hot in there. We drove home with all the windows rolled down. I never saw the Grateful Dead again. The perception that the Grateful Dead and their fans were a cult is debatable. When I saw them, the term deadhead had not yet been invented. It was just a bunch of crazy kids jumping around in front of a band. For better or worse, the Grateful Dead shifted the culture, which is not something that popularity or success alone can do. So love them or hate them, you have to admit, they rearranged the furniture whenever they came to town. They weren't just a bar band anymore. Keep on trucking, Marty. And that's the way to do it. 50 years ago. Oh man. I guess I'm going to be saying that more often than not. Last Tuesday, I was over here cooking in the kitchen, and my sister was outside watering. And when she came inside, I reminded her that it was indeed the 50-year anniversary of the show. And I asked her what did she remember about that show. And she said, honestly, not very much. But what she did say was this. She goes, she remembers explicitly getting up on our friend Stuart Golditch's shoulders and watching the show. That's what they used to do at the festival-style concerts back in the day. Well, from her vantage point, she had a clear sight line to the stage, and she said she really became fascinated looking at Jerry Garcia's hands as he played the pedal steel guitar in the New Riders. She also, right here in the kitchen, did a little imitation of how Jerry looked when he was playing the guitar in The Dead, kind of teetering back and forth in a tentative kind of a way. The only other thing that she mentioned, laughing, that she was ogling Bob Weir, which is not unusual. I mean, all the girls did that. I mean, Bob was the pinup boy in the band, after all. What I remember is when we came into the Palladium, it was still not full, and it was really, really hot that day. So we were standing under one of those big circular air conditioner vents when the band started playing. And soon into their set, they started playing Down in the Boondocks by Billy Joe Royal, a song that I always loved. So to have them, a band, playing that song right in front of me live was really a treat. After they went off the stage, it seemed like it was forever before the Dead came on. I know it was 10 p.m. because I was wearing a wristwatch, and I remember really specifically what the stage looked like, how it was set up. Their back line of amps at that time appeared to be double stacks of Fender twin reverb cabinets with tie-dyed fabric stretched over the grill cloth. This was years before the wall of sound. So by comparison, their configuration of amps was pretty rudimentary. I also remember that they had a Leslie speaker on stage. Well, you know, Pigpen was playing a Hammond B3 organ, and it's just part of the package. But when they did St. Stephen, Jerry sang the verse, "Lady fingers dipped in moonlight, writing what for across the morning sky." And when you have vocals coming through a Leslie, they kind of have this otherworldly sound because the principle that those amplifiers work on, it's a Doppler effect. They have a high frequency horn that spins and throws sound into every corner of the room. I remember that Pigpen, I was kind of surprised that he was so skinny because up until that time I'd only seen pictures of him. And none of us were aware how sick he was at that time. And I've heard that shortly after that show, he was basically out of the band until they went to Europe the following year. James Austin, who produced a lot of their product and repackaging for Rhino Records, he was introduced to me by my friend Jim Allen, who went to UCLA with him. And one Sunday morning, the three of us went to the flea market at Pasadena City College. And after, we went to Europony, a restaurant in Pasadena, and had lunch. And James was telling me, first back up, on the recording of the show that's on the internet, after the Dead do Bertha, their first number, Jerry is saying, "You with a microphone, back up 40 feet. You'll get a much better recording." And James told me that he was looking right at him when he said it because he had his tape recorder rig. The other thing that James told me was and this I don't remember at all, when the Dead did Hard to Handle, which that recording of that song has become the definitive version of the song. I mean, at least in Dead lore. Well, he said, well, Jerry was getting so unwound when he was like soloing on that he actually fell down to his knees. And that would be atypical of Jerry Garcia because he was not really into those type of histrionics, and it clearly contradicts exactly what my sister said. One time I went camping out in Joshua Tree with my friend Spencer Bird, and he brought his friend Neil Taylor with him. And Neil and I were talking about shows that we had gone to, and specifically The Dead. And he mentioned that he had gone to that show. He said that he had hitchhiked out here from the East Coast and was marooned out in the desert. And a stake bed truck full of hippies came along and picked him up and took him all the way to the Hollywood Palladium, where it deposited everybody in front of the place, and they just waltzed in. It's funny that I never saw them again after that, but you know, it was the early 70s, and once I started going to concerts, I just never stopped. And being in Los Angeles, there was constantly all sorts of stuff. I came close, but I never actually went to see them. I saw some variants of them. I saw the New Riders again. I saw them a couple months later at the Fox Theater in Long Beach with the Flying Burrito Brothers, and they were very good. But of course, by that time, Jerry was no longer with the band. And later, when Jerry had his own touring band, the Legion of Mary, I saw them twice. The first time, I took my friend Mary Sandoval to see them at the club which had formerly been the Ash Grove on Melrose. And that was a great place to see them because it was really small. I used to see the Credibility Gap there when I was in high school all the time. The other time that I saw them that year, in 1975, a couple months later, they played at the Fox Venice, and I took my friend from school, Marianne Schultz, and it was great to see them in the theater. And I think that I actually still have some transparencies that I took at that show. I haven't seen them in a long time, but I know they're in that box. And the one funny thing I remember is completely unrelated to the performance, but Marianne and I went to this, I guess it was like a Foster Freeze on Lincoln Boulevard in Venice after the show. And she was this beautiful girl who was, you know, a real sassy hippie girl that was a vegetarian. And so we sat on the bench out there outside, and she ordered like a big ice cream sundae and a big pile of greasy French fries. And this completely counteracted what I thought she was. And so that was a real funny little takeaway. Last time I talked to her, she was a librarian in Berkeley. One time, this was July 4th, 1976, I was staying in Santa Cruz, and word on the street was that the Dead were going to play in Golden Gate Park. So a couple of my roommates and myself drove up to the city on Highway 1 early that morning. And when we got to the park, see, there was no social media back then. It was just all rumors and phone calls, I suppose. But it was pretty obvious that there was not going to be a big show in the park. There was just a lot of hapless people, like, walking around in circles in the fog. And, yeah, I think I saw Robert Hunter one time at the Golden Bear in Huntington Beach. And that was good because I already recognized that Robert was, you know, the lyrical genius that was propelling that juggernaut along. And there's really not much more to it than that. I wish I had seen them more, but I didn't. What can I say? But this is a funny thing. Shortly after seeing that show at the Palladium, I remember having a dream that right here on the side yard, in between the front yard and the kitchen, it was all clogged with people. And I was in the front yard trying to make my way in, and I finally got to the backyard right here, and it was also full of people because the Grateful Dead were set up right there in the corner of the yard. And strangely, this dream, I remember this as vividly as the actual show 50 years later. And I don't know what that says about me or memory, the persistence of memory, but wow, that was something. We all know how the story of the Grateful Dead went from that point forward.